The rain poured heavily as the stormy night cast an eerie atmosphere over the desolate road. Mark, a young man on his way back home from a weekend camping trip, found himself alone on that isolated stretch of highway. His car had broken down, and with no cell service, he knew he had to find help. Despite the chilling darkness that enveloped him, Mark decided to try hitchhiking. He rationalized that it was better to take the risk than to remain stranded in the middle of nowhere. As he held out his thumb, he prayed for a kind soul to come to his rescue. Minutes passed, but no vehicles stopped. Just as Mark was losing hope, a rusty old pickup truck emerged from the darkness, its headlights cutting through the rain like beady eyes. The truck slowed down, and Mark felt a mix of relief and trepidation. The driver's window rolled down, revealing a scruffy-looking man with unkempt hair and a tattered jacket. The man had a strange, unsettling smile that sent shivers down Mark's spine, but he pushed his unease aside and climbed into the passenger seat. As they drove, Mark tried to make small talk, but the driver's responses were short and cryptic. It was evident that something was not quite right about this man. His hands trembled on the steering wheel, and he seemed to be glancing at Mark more often than the road. Mark's heart pounded in his chest, and he began to regret his decision to hitchhike. He desperately looked for any signs of civilization or a gas station, but all he saw were endless fields and a thick forest on one side of the road. The driver suddenly turned onto a narrow dirt road that disappeared into the trees. Mark's anxiety skyrocketed, and he demanded to be let out. But the driver ignored him, driving deeper into the forest. Fear consumed Mark, and he reached for the door handle, only to find that it was locked. In a panic, Mark asked the driver why he was taking this route, but the man remained silent, his eyes now darting back and forth between Mark and the road. The atmosphere inside the truck grew tense, and Mark's mind raced, contemplating how to escape this increasingly dangerous situation. After what felt like an eternity, the truck finally came to a stop in a secluded clearing deep in the heart of the forest. The driver turned to Mark, his unsettling smile widening, revealing crooked and yellowed teeth. "You shouldn't have gotten in my truck," the driver finally spoke, his voice low and ominous. Fear gripped Mark's entire being as he realized the grave danger he was in. He mustered the courage to open the door, but before he could escape, the driver grabbed his arm with surprising strength, his grip vice-like and painful. "You can't leave now," the driver hissed, his eyes filled with an unsettling mix of madness and malevolence. "You're going to stay with me forever." Mark struggled to break free, adrenaline surging through his veins, but the driver's grip only tightened. He knew he had to act quickly if he had any chance of survival. Summoning every ounce of strength, Mark fought back with all his might, landing a desperate punch to the driver's abdomen. The sudden blow caught the man off guard, and he released Mark, gasping for air. Seizing the opportunity, Mark burst out of the truck and sprinted into the forest, guided only by the dim moonlight filtering through the thick canopy above. He could hear the driver's enraged screams echoing behind him, urging him to run even faster. With his heart pounding in his ears, Mark ran for what felt like an eternity. The forest seemed never-ending, and he felt as if it was conspiring against him. Just as his hope began to wane, he saw the faint glimmer of distant headlights. Summoning his last reserves of energy, Mark pushed himself forward, stumbling out of the forest and onto the road where salvation awaited. A kind couple in a passing car spotted him and stopped to help. Breathless and terrified, Mark told them about the horrifying encounter he had just escaped. The couple offered him a ride to the nearest town, where he could contact the authorities and seek safety. As the police investigated the incident, they searched for the mysterious pickup truck and its deranged driver but found no trace of either. The forest seemed to have swallowed them whole, leaving only Mark's chilling recollection of the night's terror. From that night onward, Mark's perspective on hitchhiking and the world, in general, changed forever. The horrors he faced in the remote woods haunted him, a constant reminder of the malevolence that could lurk in the most unexpected places. And so, the legend of the hitchhiker from hell spread, serving as a warning to all who traveled alone on dark and stormy nights. The tale would be passed down from generation to generation, ensuring that no one would ever forget the horrifying encounter of Mark and the nightmarish hitchhiker that lurked in the darkness. It was a dark and stormy night in a small town in the Midwest. Sarah, a young college student, was driving home after a late-night study session at the university library. The rain poured heavily, and the visibility on the road was poor. She had a long drive ahead of her, and the loneliness of the deserted highway made her feel uneasy. As Sarah drove through the rain-soaked roads, she noticed a figure standing by the side of the road, drenched and looking forlorn. It was a hitchhiker, a sight not uncommon in this remote part of the country. Despite her initial hesitation, Sarah's compassion got the better of her, and she decided to stop and offer the stranger a ride. She rolled down her window and called out, "Hey, do you need a lift?" The hitchhiker turned to her, and she could see a flash of gratitude in their eyes. They hurriedly got into the back seat of her car, expressing their thanks for the kind gesture. The rain continued to pour heavily, and the hitchhiker was visibly cold and shivering. Sarah felt a pang of sympathy and offered them her jacket. As they continued down the road, Sarah tried to engage the hitchhiker in small talk, but they remained quiet and reserved, offering only brief responses. As they drove further into the night, Sarah noticed that the hitchhiker seemed to be getting increasingly anxious. They kept glancing out of the windows and looking back as if expecting someone to follow them. Unease settled in Sarah's stomach, and she began to regret her decision to pick up the stranger. She tried to reassure herself that it was just her imagination, that the hitchhiker was probably just nervous due to the storm. But as they approached a particularly dark stretch of the highway, Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw a figure standing by the side of the road, dressed in the same clothes as the hitchhiker. It was as if they had a twin. Her instincts screamed at her to drive faster, to get away from whatever was happening. She glanced at the rearview mirror and noticed that the hitchhiker was now staring at the figure outside with a look of terror in their eyes. Panicking, Sarah pressed on the gas pedal, determined to put as much distance between them and the strange doppelganger as possible. The hitchhiker pleaded with her to stop, claiming that the figure was their sibling who was in trouble and needed their help. Sarah didn't know what to believe. Her heart pounded in her chest as she wrestled with the decision to keep driving or stop and potentially put herself in danger. Finally, she made up her mind and decided to trust her instincts. She kept driving, ignoring the hitchhiker's desperate pleas to turn back. The figure outside grew smaller and eventually disappeared into the darkness. As they left the dark stretch of the road behind them, the hitchhiker became increasingly agitated, demanding that Sarah stop the car immediately. But Sarah knew that she couldn't risk it, not with the eerie situation unfolding before her. She drove until they reached a well-lit gas station, where she finally stopped the car. The hitchhiker, angered and afraid, got out of the car and disappeared into the night without another word. Trembling with fear and relief, Sarah called the police to report the strange encounter. The police assured her that they would look into it, but nothing ever came of the investigation. To this day, Sarah is haunted by that night, wondering what would have happened if she had listened to the hitchhiker's desperate pleas. The memory of the strange doppelganger and the eerie encounter on that dark, stormy night remains etched in her mind as a chilling reminder of the dangers of picking up hitchhikers and trusting strangers in the dead of the night. In the late 1970s, in a small town in the American Midwest, there was a chilling tale about a hitchhiker who haunted a particular stretch of highway. Locals warned travelers about picking up hitchhikers on this road, as there had been multiple reports of eerie encounters. One evening, a young couple, Mark and Lisa, were driving back home after visiting relatives in a neighboring state. It was a long journey, and fatigue began to set in as they made their way through the dark and desolate highway. As they drove, they noticed a figure standing by the side of the road. It was a man, dressed in outdated clothing and looking disheveled. Despite the warnings they had heard, Mark's compassionate nature got the better of him, and he decided to stop and offer the hitchhiker a ride. The hitchhiker climbed into the back seat of the car without saying a word. Mark and Lisa exchanged uneasy glances, but they tried to be polite and struck up a conversation with the mysterious passenger. To their surprise, the hitchhiker remained eerily quiet throughout the journey. He didn't respond to their questions or make any attempt to engage in conversation. The atmosphere in the car grew tense, and both Mark and Lisa began to feel a sense of unease. As they approached a crossroads, the hitchhiker suddenly spoke in a soft, haunting voice, directing them to take a different route. His instructions were cryptic and made little sense, but Mark, feeling unnerved by the hitchhiker's presence, complied. As they drove along the new route, the surroundings grew more unfamiliar. The hitchhiker's directions seemed to lead them deeper into the darkness of the night. Lisa tried to reason with Mark, urging him to turn back or ask for help, but Mark was determined to follow the hitchhiker's instructions. With each passing mile, the hitchhiker's presence seemed to cast a sinister shadow over the car. The air grew colder, and an unsettling silence enveloped the vehicle. Finally, the hitchhiker directed Mark to stop the car at an old abandoned farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. He got out of the car without a word, disappearing into the darkness. Mark and Lisa were filled with a mix of fear and relief as they drove away from the farmhouse. They couldn't shake the feeling that they had narrowly escaped something far more sinister than they could comprehend. The couple eventually made it home, shaken by their encounter with the hitchhiker. They reported the strange incident to the local authorities, but no trace of the mysterious man could be found. Over the years, the story of the hitchhiker spread throughout the town, becoming a cautionary tale for travelers in the area. Some claim to have encountered the same hitchhiker on that stretch of highway, while others dismissed it as a mere urban legend. To this day, the mystery of the hitchhiker remains unsolved. No one knows who he was or why he appeared on that desolate road, guiding travelers to unknown destinations. But the legend lives on, a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurk in the darkness, and a warning to all who venture down that haunted highway. In the remote countryside, where the winding road stretched into the horizon, a chilling tale of horror unfolded. It was a moonless night, and the darkness was so intense that even the stars seemed to hide from whatever malevolence lurked in the shadows. As the clock struck midnight, a weary traveler named John found himself stranded on the side of the road. His car had broken down, and his phone had no signal. Feeling a sense of desperation, he decided to take a chance and try to hitch a ride. He knew the stories of dangerous hitchhikers, but he couldn't bear the thought of waiting alone in the darkness any longer. Shortly after sticking his thumb out, a pair of dim headlights appeared in the distance. As the vehicle approached, John's heart raced with hope. But as the car drew near, he noticed something unsettling. The driver's face was concealed by a tattered scarf, and a sinister aura surrounded the vehicle. Feeling a tinge of unease, John hesitated for a moment, but with no other options, he reluctantly opened the door and climbed into the back seat. The driver didn't speak a word, only a chilling smile spread across his face. John tried to break the silence by making small talk, but his words seemed to fall on deaf ears. As they drove through the desolate countryside, John noticed that the landscape had changed, and the surroundings seemed unfamiliar. He asked the driver where they were headed, but the response was an eerie laugh that sent shivers down his spine. Time passed like a slow, torturous crawl, and John's fear intensified. The driver's bizarre behavior made him question whether this was a mistake he would regret for the rest of his life. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was in the presence of something sinister. In the distance, John spotted a gas station, the only sign of civilization for miles. He pleaded with the driver to stop, claiming that he needed to use the restroom urgently. Surprisingly, the driver obliged and pulled into the station's parking lot. As John stepped out of the car, he noticed something unsettling in the back seat, a rusty knife covered in what appeared to be dried blood. Panic surged through him, and his mind raced with escape plans. He rushed into the gas station, praying for help. The station attendant, an elderly man, looked up from behind the counter, his face etched with concern. John quickly told him about the terrifying encounter he had just experienced. The attendant listened intently, his expression growing more serious with every word. "You're lucky to be alive," the old man said, his voice shaking slightly. "You've encountered the hitchhiker of death." John's blood ran cold, and he demanded an explanation. The attendant shared a chilling legend that had haunted the region for generations. According to the tale, a malevolent spirit disguised itself as a hitchhiker, preying on unsuspecting travelers. Its sinister intent was to lead them astray and take their lives in a gruesome manner. The legend spoke of the spirit's malevolence, its joy in causing suffering and misery. And the worst part was that it could never be killed or stopped. It merely latched onto new victims, continuing its dreadful cycle of terror. John was paralyzed with fear. The attendant offered to call the police, but he knew it wouldn't make a difference. The entity was beyond the reach of mortal authorities. In a state of panic, John decided he couldn't stay at the gas station, and he needed to find a way to escape the grasp of the hitchhiker of death. The old man offered a cryptic piece of advice: face the darkest corners of your mind, and perhaps you'll find the path to elude the evil that pursues you. As the night wore on, John's heart pounded in his chest. He knew he had to face his fears, but he couldn't understand what the old man had meant. In a last-ditch effort, he mustered the courage to face the hitchhiker again, knowing full well that his life hung in the balance. John returned to the spot where the hitchhiker had picked him up. The dark, foreboding presence of the road filled him with dread. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to confront the terror within. As he stood on the desolate road, he felt a sudden wave of clarity. He realized that the hitchhiker of death fed off fear and despair, and the only way to escape its grasp was to find strength in the face of terror. With newfound resolve, John turned away from the road and walked forward, away from the malevolent spirit. As he did, the atmosphere seemed to lighten, and the malevolence that had once surrounded him slowly dissipated. The following morning, a passing motorist found John walking on the side of the road, several miles away from where he had been stranded. He recounted his harrowing tale to the Good Samaritan, who couldn't believe what he had heard. Though John survived the terrifying encounter, he knew he would forever carry the weight of the hitchhiker of death's chilling presence in his memory. He had faced the darkness within himself that night, and it had saved him from an unimaginable fate. From that day on, John vowed never to hitchhike again, and he warned others about the malevolent spirit that haunted the roads in the dead of night. The legend of the hitchhiker of death lived on, serving as a chilling reminder of the darkness that could lurk on the lonely highways of the world. Thank you again for joining us for another video. If you liked the video, please like, subscribe and comment down below and let us know what you would like to hear in the near future. See you all again soon.